I don't know where all often is, but I think it should be, mandated in schools going forward to teach Zoom so that the future generation just knows going forward. 3 years in, I still don't know how. Okay, Joe Jenkins.
Percent, we are at 60.4% today. Well, that's a record.
Yeah. I think
Yes, Mark, one time you were curious.
My guest is Stephanie Cronin. She's a former Cedarville colleague and she's a future prospective member.
And then I have a guest, my wife Amanda. Hi.
Okay. Don Adams, you're up.
I hope you don't have a long presentation today. I was preempted last week and I'm preempted again next week, so I've got about an hour's worth of material. Today is October 28th. It's the 301st day of the year. It's only 64 days left in 2022. Also, a note for the Rotary Club, on this day, Elvis Presley received his polio vaccine on national television. It is also National Champagne Day, National First Responders Day, National Frankenstein Friday, National Bandana Day. See anybody wearing bandanas? National Breadsticks Day, National Chocolate Day, Plush Animal Lovers Day, and Statue of Liberty Dedication Day. On this day in history, in 1492, Christopher Columbus sighted Cuba and claimed it for Spain under the name Juana. In 1636, Harvard University in Cambridge was founded by the vote of the Massachusetts General Court. In 1793, Eli Whitney applied for a patent on the cotton gin. In 1831, Michael Faraday, the father of electrical engineering, demonstrated his dynamo invention, an electric generator. In 1886, the Statue of Liberty was dedicated by the U.S. President Grover Cleveland and celebrated by the first confetti ticker tape parade in New York City. I found this one interesting. 1890, the World Championship Baseball Series, Washington Park, New York. Louisville Colonels beat Brooklyn Bridegrooms 6-2 in Game 7 to tie series at 3-3-1. Deciding game was never played. And in 1904, the St. Louis police tried a new investigative method. They used fingerprints for the first time. And for those of us that are glad we didn't live then, 1919, the Volstead Act was passed, establishing prohibition. And in 1929, this was a sad day for Wall Street. It dropped 38.33 points. That was 13%. And in 1965, the Gateway Arch was completed in St. Louis, Missouri. A couple of things of note, since some haven't been here, is Sandy Brubaker had a birthday back in October 25th. Joshua Foster, October 26th. And member anniversaries, Tony Oberholzer, 4 years, and Jerry Pfeiffer, 18 years. In the news today, the average interest rate for a typical 30-year mortgage surpassed 7% this week, the highest level since 2001. Wow. And a team of scientists and experts on Monday began a new study into unidentified aerial phenomena, UAPs, formerly known as UFOs. So the 9-month study will lay the groundwork for future study on the nature of UAPs for NASA and other organizations. Seems to me that was a blue book thing here several years ago, but do the same thing with A 6,000-pound sunfish was discovered off the coast of Portugal. They say it's the heaviest bony fish in the world. And Elon Musk took over Twitter this morning and said that he was going to cut their employee base by 75%. And I guess he did start this morning, started firing people. Trick or treat's just around the corner. But what if you can trade your sweet treats for cash? One local dentist is looking to buy back your holiday home and support the troops at the same time. Bright Smiles Pediatric Dentistry, I think they're at Springboro. You'll buy it back for $1 a pound, and you'll donate it all to the troops. And on a side note, if you've got kids out there on Monday and trick or treat, be sure you check their candy. There's a lot of really nasty stuff out there right now, especially with that rainbow fentanyl. You never know what you're going to be getting. Customers at the Monroe Kroger store can now use Krogo carts. They have built-in scales and cameras. The high-tech carts give customers the option to scan groceries as they shop, pay at the cart, and completely skip the checkout line. Yes, I think they're following the path of Walmart. No cashiers anymore. And also on a sad note, Nancy Pelosi's home was broken into last night. Her husband Paul was attacked with a hammer. Apparently he's going to be all right, but it shows you that really no one's safe out there. A couple of fun and useless facts out here. A jiffy is about 1/trillionth of a second. The cigarette lighter was invented before the match. Dragonflies have 6 legs, but can't walk. It's possible to lead a cow upstairs, but not downstairs. Somebody try that. Mulan was the highest kill count of any Disney character. 3.6 cans of Spam are consumed each second. The average American looks at 8 houses before buying one. A snail can sleep for 3 years. Your stomach produces a new layer of mucus every 2 weeks so that it doesn't digest itself. Right-handed people on average live 9 years longer than left-handed people. Women have more taste buds than men. I think they have more taste than men too. They also see more colors than men. This is what I didn't know. Taco Bell was named after its owner, Glenn Bell. And the average American spends about 2.5 days a year looking for lost items. Varsi's the only king in the deck without a mustache. And the U.S. Air Force introduced Bob Ross to painting. Didn't realize that either. Well, I finally reached the wonder years. I wonder where I parked my car. I wonder where I left my phone, where I left my glasses. I wonder what day it is. Koi fish always travel in groups of 4, and there's a reason for that. When the A koi, B koi, and C koi escape, the predator always goes after the decoy. Wow. I was told that I should get as excited about church as I do about football. I did that, but then I was asked to leave. It seems dumping a bottle of Gatorade over the pastor after a rousing sermon isn't what they do. The judge said to the defendant, "I thought I told you I never wanted to see you in here again." "Your Honor," the criminal said, "that's what I tried to tell the police, but they wouldn't believe me." After years of wondering why he did not look like his younger sister or brother, a young man asked his mother if he was adopted. "Yes, you were, son." The mother replied as she started to cry softly, but it didn't work out and they brought you back. Dad, I'm going to be a politician, said Jim. His father said, and what are you doing to become one? Nothing, Dad. Good, you're halfway there then. What does cheese say when his picture's taken? It was sometime after I shot the third zombie that I began to wonder why they were carrying bags of candy and ringing my doorbell. I'm not saying a word without my lawyer present. You are the lawyer. So where's my present? The one Mother Superior from County Tipperary was dying. The nuns gathered around her bed trying to make her more comfortable. They gave her some warm milk to drink, but she refused it. Then one nun took the glass back to the kitchen, remembering a bottle of Irish whiskey that was received as a gift. She opened it and poured a generous amount into the warm milk. Back at the Mother Superior's bed, she held the glass to her lips. Mother Superior drank a little, then a little more, and before she knew it, she drank the whole glass down to the last drop. Mother, the nuns replied, please give us some wisdom before you die. She raised herself up out of the bed, a pious look on her face, and said, don't sell that cow. And as always, I'd like to leave you with a couple of positive thoughts. Failure is not the opposite of success. It's part of success. You can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending. A few finds for the day. If you've been to the Statue of Liberty, that's $1. If you've been to the Gateway Arch, that's $1. If you've seen a UFO or UAP, that's probably $2.
I call them big.
If you've been to Taco Bell in the last week, that's $1. And if you do not have your rotary pin on, that's $1. Back to Brandon for happy months.
I think we should give him every week off. There was at least a marginal improvement. That's all that extra time to practice. So, okay, happy bus.
I have a couple. The first one is about my son Jack. He sent me a text this morning and let me know he was selected to be included in the National Honor Society.
Wow.
It's a prayer buck, also a happy buck. I'm venturing up to Cleveland on Monday to root on the Bengals for Monday night football. Good day.
I'd look up there and she says.
Who else? No, oh, Alex.
Every year, the staff gets on me, they like to wear jeans all the time, I let them wear jeans on Friday, so a couple of years ago, I said, let's pick a good cause, and then you can wear jeans for the rest of the year, so last 2 years, we did Feed the Creek. Last year, just under $1,000 in food or items donated to Feed the Creek. This year, over 1,000, so staff got to wear jeans for the rest of the year, and even our uniform staff, like Randy over there, they donated even though they can't get out of it.
No one else? Okay. I've got a few here. I apologize, I've been gone for a few weeks. Did the Columbus Half Marathon a few weeks ago, and I've been I got sick the day before, which is very, very frustrating when you've been training a lot. And I went out and I still actually ran like my third best half marathon of all time while sick. And that was with a bathroom stop in the 3rd mile. So I was very impressed with my effort, because for the last 2 weeks since, I just felt terrible. We went to Colorado last week with a 7-month-old and I was terrified, but kudos to our son, all the way to Cincinnati, flight there to the rental car agency, drive to Estes Park, hiking through Rocky Mountain, rehearsal dinner that night. He cried like 5 minutes over like I don't know, 18 hours. So we have an amazing son. I got my 300th bird species identified in Colorado, which was very exciting for me. You know, it was during the wedding. I probably was not focused on what I should have been focused on. And then I have been without my son and my wife now for 5 days as they're in Boston. But Hunter is getting to meet today his great aunt and great uncle for the first time, and tomorrow his great grandmother and great grandfather. This is his great grandparents' first great grandson, and they're 97 years old. So very excited for the whole family. Wish I could be there. So that's all I have. Last chance, having books. Oh,
Well, couple of announcements.
yep.
I still need to get, Maine Elementary sign up for dictionaries and coloring books. So see me if you want to, do that, Maine Elementary. The rest of you that have got schools, go ahead and contact the principals and set that up. Books are at my office. And it is a kind of a customer service announcement. The Beavercreek Police posted, a customer called me yesterday. So the bad guys are breaking into cars, or busting out windows, and they're stealing stuff from fitness clubs. So if you don't leave your laptops and your cell phones and your purses in the seats, because that's what's happening. 7 cars got busted into, I think it was yesterday morning.
Wow.
So they posted a thing on Facebook, just, you know, if you gotta hide it, hide it. Don't leave it outside. Because people are busting the windows out and stealing stuff from your cars. Just don't go out.
Anyone else? Okay, ticket drawing. We have 3 today. The first one is for the regular ticket drawing. Here we have 117 917.
Too long.
Oh, darn it.
917. Anyone?
Must be someone. There you go. That's right.
Here's your mic right ahead of me. I got 919.
Oh, no one?
She got there.
Is it you?
I've been somebody that came in early, because I was,
So as long as it's for me.
I'm 9.
917, folks.
I got 919.
Okay.
There was 3.
Someone's gonna call. We're gonna do it one.
Here it is back here.
I don't have any measures at Eric's. I don't know.
That's late. You grab yours?
Yeah, I gave you
I'm going over here, so I don't know.
the drawing in.
Who bought him strong in?
There. Very good. Good meeting, Eric. You let him draw it now. That he. Okay, we're drawing the one. Sorry. Take 2 here. We have 117947.
That's right. 47.
Yeah. I can't remember. Don said we had
Oh, so close.
6 of diamonds. Operos. We have 2 random giveaways. I can't remember their gift cards, I believe. $25 at Fridays. Okay, so the first one is 117925. 925. Wow. Happy birthday. Bring something. Second one here is 117910. Jim Rudd. Speaking of Jim Rudd. Flags for Heroes is coming up. We have the installation on November 5th, Saturday at 3 p.m. at Be Hope Church. The ceremony for the Flags for Heroes will be the 11th of November. That's a Friday at 5 p.m. at Be Hope. And then the following day, the 12th of November, Saturday at 3 p.m. will be the removal of Flags for Heroes. Let's see. Okay, with that, it's time for introduction.
All right,
Our speaker today is Dr. Mark Caleb Smith. He is the director of the Center for Political Studies at Cedarville University. He is a leading political scientist in the state of Ohio. And on the way over today, I asked him what he's going to speak about. And he has two 20-minute presentations he can give. One is on the midterms, and the second one is on Georgia football. So with a big applause, thank Mark Caleb Smith for coming today to speak about the midterms. Mark.
Yeah, don't worry, fans. Maybe at some point your team too can win a national championship. I don't know when that might happen. It could be a few years, could be a few decades. Who knows?
Free furniture.
But not everybody can be a Georgia Bulldog. I understand that. Not everyone's so blessed. That's fine. I do always remind Mark, however, of that glorious college football playoff game against the University of Michigan that took place. It was a nail biter for the first 30 seconds or so.
Presentation.
Yeah. I enjoyed the game quite a bit. I don't know about you, but I enjoyed the game quite a bit. So the midterms it is, I suppose, by popular demand. So let's talk a little about the history of midterms. Some of this is well known to you all. You all are very politically active and engaged. Hopefully you can see this text. If you can't, I'll go through some of it anyway. We're looking at the first midterm election of the first term of office for president. And so those are a little bit unusual in a sense, not like other midterm elections. On average, and we're looking at since the Roosevelt administration, thinking not look at the whole sweep of American history. On average, the president's party loses about 25 House seats and about 5 or 6 Senate seats in a typical first midterm election. George W. Bush was an exception in 2002. That was some 9/11 residue still. His approval rating was sky high. He actually picked up 8 seats in the House, 1 seat in the Senate. That was an unusual election. We typically don't see anything quite like that. There's some important variables. And so when we think of midterm, obviously these midterm results change a lot based on what we're looking at. There are some important variables. One of them is inflation. So inflation is negatively related to the president's party's performance. Higher inflation, the lower the performance, the more seats they stand to lose. We'll talk more about that, but obviously that's not good for the Biden administration at this particular moment. Presidential approval is positively correlated to the party's performance. So the more popular the president is, the better his party will do as a rule, typically. Also, one I think we don't think much about, at least not publicly, is the number of seats being defended, especially the United States Senate. So the more seats you're defending as the president's party, the more likely you're going to lose Senate seats. And so something else to at least consider.
Ooh, I can't read that.
Yeah, the conversion did not go over well. I'm gonna blame Zoom for that.
It's a good graph.
Wow, it's a phenomenal graph, I promise. There are 2 of them, and they're both equally phenomenal. Okay, so what we're looking at basically is those graphs were supposed to show you particular moments and particular outcomes. We've had 2 what you might call wave elections since the Carter administration in particular. You probably remember those. One of those was during the Clinton administration, during his midterm. The other was during the Obama administration. Clinton lost 54 House seats in that midterm election. So the Democrats really suffered. In the Obama presidency, they lost 63 House seats in that midterm. Trump's midterm, Republicans lost 41 seats. So also significant setbacks in those cases as well. But if you look at the results, presidential approval isn't a great predictor in those particular cases. You know, President Obama is actually more popular than Trump, more popular than Clinton, and more popular than Biden, but he suffered a huge defeat, obviously, in his first midterm. And I think there's some good explanations for that. One of them is redistricting kicked in and affected the Obama administration pretty negatively. The other one was his agenda was profoundly floundering
And his efforts on healthcare and other things were particularly polarizing and divisive. So I think they suffered there. With the Clinton administration, with the red wave then, I think the best explanation for it is that Republicans were in the process of realigning in the South. What I mean by that is for many decades, Republican Party had done quite well at the presidential level in the South, but they started to do better at the Senate level and then the House level and then all the way down into state and local elections. In '94, we sort of see that culminate with those House results in that particular election against the Clinton administration and against the Democrats. If you remember back then, you even had Democrats switching parties after that election, switching to the Republican Party. So it was just a significant moment. All that to say, I don't know if we see those kinds of factors right now. That doesn't mean it's that Biden's going to do well. The Republicans are going to do poorly, but I'm not sure those kind of factors are necessarily present. So what are we looking at the moment? Right now, the U.S. House is incredibly closely divided. Democrats have 220 seats, so just a couple of seats will shift control of the House of Representatives one way or another. I think almost everyone thinks Republicans are going to take control of the House. And if that doesn't happen, that'll be a massive shock. I think right now you're probably looking at 80 to 85% likelihood that the GOP takes control of the House, just based on these margins. The Senate is, of course, as close as it can possibly get. So 50 from each party in the United States Senate at the moment. So a change of one seat in either direction is going to shift control of the Senate. There are 35 Senate seats up for grabs. There's one special election right now in Oklahoma, which creates the 35 number, which is unusual. 14 of those are Democratic seats, 21 of them are Republican seats. Which means, in a sense, the Democrats are playing in a good position. They're defending fewer seats, means they can lose potentially fewer seats. They have way more opportunities for pickups than Republicans do, which I think gives them slightly better odds in the Senate. But we also have to be pretty honest with where we are in terms of what we would call the political climate. And not just the elections themselves, but what's the context in which all these elections are occurring. President Biden's approval rating has been sluggish since he was elected to office. He's not really gotten above that 50% threshold. And in fact, he's usually around the low 40s, maybe topping out at 44, 45% at the most. But if you look at it on a graph, it's actually pretty similar to President Trump's approval rating. Very similar figures when you look at it throughout the first 2 years in office. Inflation is generationally bad. I don't have to tell any of you that. But inflation right now, it's been roughly 40 years since we've seen inflation quite like what we're looking at the moment, which I think more than suggests that that's probably going to be the dominant factor when most people go to vote. Which again, I think is very bad for the Biden administration, potentially quite good for the Republicans. I think though, if we're on this, I'm not a partisan. I'm not with one group or the other. I think if we're honest, though, we have to say the Republicans have hurt themselves through some of their candidate selections. So if Republicans had chosen a little bit more wisely in places like Ohio, potentially, or Pennsylvania, or Georgia, then maybe they would be well ahead in some of these races where they're really still tight and they could potentially lose in these Senate contests. When we look at a wave election, we usually see late-breaking voters head in one direction. And that creates all the momentum, which then gives you this really significant result. Right now, late-breaking voters are going Republican. The polling is shifting in that direction. And so it looks like if there's a wave, it's certainly heading toward the Republican side. How big it is, how significant it might be, we certainly don't know. But it is good news for the Republican Party. Also, if we look in the generic ballot, when we do polling, we ask people sort of which party will you vote for in Congress? We don't put a candidate's name or anything else on, just a generic question. Republicans are ahead of the generic ballot. They usually trail in generic ballot, even when they do fairly well. And so this is another good sign for the GOP. Key Senate contests, you all know most of these probably if you pay attention to politics. Obviously here in Ohio, we have a key contest. Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, New Hampshire, Nevada, Arizona. So when we look at those key contests, Republicans
control 3 of those seats. They have to maintain all those seats and then pick up at least 1 of those additional Democratic seats. The Democrats have to hold on to their seats, all of them, or pick up one of those Republican seats in order to keep their majority. So this looks good for the Republican Party on the whole, I think, because the close elections are more Democratic than otherwise. And this is where certainly the control of the Senate will come down to. The starred ones there, if you're curious, those are open seat elections, which means there's no incumbent running. Open seat elections typically are more competitive as a rule and more likely to see a party switch. I want to spend the last few minutes here talking about a variety of wild cards. In other words, variables that are maybe difficult to measure and could have an effect that we just don't know. One of those, I think, is abortion. Now, the Supreme Court, as you know, overturned Roe versus Wade in June with the Dobbs decision. When that happened, I think that you saw some momentum for the Democrats. Polling showed this momentum, and it appeared like maybe they would be in a good position for the upcoming midterms. But at that moment as well, the economy was at least relatively stable. Well, then July happens, August happens, September, October, inflation starts to skyrocket. And so whatever momentum they had built up, maybe because of the Dobbs decision, I think has been blunted pretty dramatically by the economy. But it's still an issue. How big of an issue, it's really hard to tell. The only way that I think it could play a significant role is if one of these two conditions are met. It could be, and I frankly, again, we don't know, it could be that there are a significant number of women in particular who actually support abortion, but don't say that publicly and don't say it in polls. And when they go vote, their votes will reflect their support for abortion. You know, anecdotally, I've heard of some of these kind of instances where people say, you know, you're going to be surprised because even within churches and families, there are more people who support abortion kind of behind the scenes that you would never know about. I don't know that that's true, but it's at least possible. The other possibility is there maybe is a significant number of people who either haven't voted historically or weren't yet able to vote because of their age, who are now in the political system because of the abortion issue. So these would be new voters who are being energized by the issue in a way that we can't quite yet measure. Now, I think anytime that you suppose that young voters are going to matter, you're probably supposing something wrong. Young voters have the lowest rate of turnout of any other voters demographically. And so it would take a significant historic movement, I think, to see young voters sort of jump into the system and cast ballots in a way that made a huge difference. It could happen, but it's probably just not very likely. It's also true, I think, that neither party has really capitalized on this issue very well. Now, I'm not making a moral argument. I'm not making an ethical argument. I'm making a purely political argument. If you look at the polling on abortion, the most popular thing that would satisfy about 2/3 of Americans is restrictions at about 15 weeks. So you get roughly 2/3 of the country to support you. They live with it, and they'd generally be happier if that were the standard. Neither party will go toward that standard. Now you can understand why, right? The polarization within the parties, the Democrats feel like they're forced into being supporters of abortion well past 15 weeks, maybe even up to 9 months and more. Republicans feel like they can't have any exceptions or allow any latitude. And so neither party is really getting toward that, statistically speaking, the place that you'd want a politician to land in order to garner the most votes. I honestly thought that it was possible we'd see a few candidates maybe break from their party and gravitate toward this middle position, but I really haven't seen any nationally prominent candidates do that. Lindsey Graham has proposed a bill that would do this effectively at the national level, but he's not running for re-election right now, which is maybe why he's proposing the bill and not someone else. And so neither party's really capitalized on the issue, at least purely in terms of trying to win new voters, I don't think. It's also true that abortion's on the ballot in a number of states this fall. It's going to be considered as a constitutional amendment or as an initiative in these states.
And so when we get some of these results, it'll give us something interesting, I think, to see about where the country stands on the abortion issue. Excuse me, another wild card, and it's really the only word to use to describe him, would be President Trump. He's a wild card in the sense that, at least to my knowledge, we've never had a defeated president play a significant role in the next midterm election. So Jimmy Carter loses, he kind of goes away. George Herbert Walker Bush loses, he kind of just goes away at that point. They're still there, they matter. They're going to speak publicly occasionally, but Donald Trump has made himself a significant figure in the Republican Party even after the loss. Because of that, I think it's kind of skewed what we're looking at in a way compared to a normal midterm election year. In other words, Democrats would love for this election to be about Donald Trump. And President Trump often accommodates them by putting himself in the media and doing rallies and things like that. Republicans benefit from Trump's presence. It motivates their base. It'll probably increase turnout when he does things and shows up places, but it will probably also motivate Democratic voters as well. And so, that's why he's a double-edged sword. I think to one extent he's beneficial for Republicans, but another way he's beneficial for Democrats. Whenever you think of former President Trump, he's a polarizing figure. He's particularly off-putting to whites with a college degree and to suburban voters. And because of that, to the extent that they're swing voters, they could affect the Republican performance in November. So it's possible, I use these words a lot. It's possible that the Republicans could have done better had President Trump stayed on the sidelines. We'll see. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they will do better because of his presence. I'm not necessarily convinced that that's true. So one more wild card here. And it's polling. So there's a real temptation, I think, to just sort of ignore the polls. And there may be a little bit of wisdom in that. If we've seen a trend over the last 3 election cycles, the polls have consistently underreported Republican support. Sometimes it's just a couple of percentage points. Sometimes it's 4, 5, 6, 7 percentage points when we compare the last poll to the actual results. So it's possible that we're looking at a larger Republican wave that the polls are capturing because we're not quite figuring out who all those Republican voters are. Maybe we'll wake up on Wednesday morning and J.D. Vance will win by 7 or 8 percentage points, 10 percentage points, who knows? And so it could be that we're really underestimating what's about to take place because we just haven't polled Trump supporters in particular all that well. It's also, whenever you look at polls, I just want to encourage you to be skeptical to some extent, but also be skeptical of the more localized the poll is. So the smaller the area that's being polled, the more skeptical you should probably be of it, frankly. The larger polls that are covering more people with broader samples are usually going to be a little bit more reliable. So national polls are usually a little bit better than state polls, which are a little bit better than local polls. So just keep that in mind as you're looking at polling results. One last thing here is some people have already voted. A lot of people have already voted. So the polls may not be capturing what happened in those early voting processes. And so maybe we're going to be surprised by early votes having a bigger effect in a way that we aren't quite predicting through our polling. Think of the people who voted, say, or who already voted before the Senate debate in Pennsylvania. Right? So you can see a lot of weird things happen, even though events have taken place that would suggest otherwise, because early voting is it's just sort of a monkey in the system. So a few interesting races to watch. So if you're watching returns on that Tuesday night, the Utah Senate race, Mike Lee, the incumbent Republican, is facing a pretty stiff challenge from Evan McMullin. Evan McMullin ran an independent campaign against President Trump in 2016. He didn't really do all that much. But the Democratic Party in Utah endorsed him, even though he's an independent candidate. And so he's collected the Democratic voters in Utah, which, maybe we could fit into this room. I don't know. It's not all that big.
It's not really fair probably, but he's captured them, he's capturing independent voters. The polling says that that race is razor thin right now. If McMullen somehow beats Lee, that's a significant moment, I think. Mitt Romney has not endorsed in that race. So, there's a good bit of acrimony going on there, I think, and it's going to be interesting to watch. The Oklahoma governor's race, Kevin Stitt is the incumbent Republican. Donald Trump won Oklahoma by 30 percentage points in 2020, and Kevin Stitt is almost about to lose. The woman who's running against him was a Republican who switched parties a year ago in order to run against Kevin Stitt as a Democrat. And right now she's ahead of the polling. Again, just sort of makes you scratch your head. Now, these last two, you might look at the names and say, why is he doing it like this? JD Vance is not running against Mike DeWine, right? And Herschel Walker's not running against Brian Kemp in Georgia. But I'm going to watch the results of those races and compare them to each other. So there's a good chance that Mike DeWine finishes well ahead of JD Vance's vote totals. And there's a good chance that Brian Kemp finishes well ahead of Herschel Walker's vote totals in Georgia, which suggests there may be a large number of Republicans who are splitting their ticket at the top of the ballot because they're dissatisfied with these Senate choices. How big that number is, I think is going to have a lot to say about the future of the Republican Party in those states. They could end up being very small, which means it's just not all that consequential. But in Ohio, for example, Matt Dolan won 23% of the vote in the primary, in the Republican primary, and that's a significant number. What do those voters do when they cast a ballot in November? And I think most of them are going to vote Republican. But we don't know that for sure. And so seeing what their behavior looks like, I think will be interesting to watch. And this is because of my bias, I'll freely admit that. But I think there's still a good bit of argument within the Republican Party about what its future looks like. And all of these elections get to that issue, I think. To what extent is it a party that's defined by President Trump? And to what extent is it a party that's defined by other things? And these races, I think, will help us figure out what that looks like here, at least in a couple of weeks. All right, any questions?
Do you factor in, I happen to know a lot of Democrats are gonna vote for DeWine that probably will not vote for Dewey.
Yes, I'm sure that's true as well.
Yeah. Factor there as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I think that's fair. I think, Mayor Whaley's in a tough spot, running against a guy with his credentials and background, and yeah, for sure. It's a fair point. Good observation. Yes.
So much for the next Congress. You've got 4 counties in Oregon that have voted to secede from the state to join another state.
Yes.
2 more are voting this November. Will Congress, will they listen to that? I mean, they haven't changed the state border in 130 years.
Right. There's also a secessionary movement in California, middle of California. Some of them want to pull away from the coastal parts of California. The middle of California is pretty Republican, pretty conservative. Northern California is a little more Republican as well. And so there are movements in California to potentially do that. I don't think Congress is going to vote to allow them to redefine their borders. Most states have pockets of partisanship that don't fit with the overall state profile. So, we have Cleveland and Columbus and Cincinnati that have different political profiles of some degree or another compared to the state of Ohio. If we start to open up that box and say, oh, just, go ahead, secede. I don't know where that stops, honestly. And so I'm not sure that Congress is going to want to go down that road. Now, granted, the Oregon case and California, they're contiguous. So they can make a better argument that they should be able to go to a border or something like that. But within most red states, there are blue cities. And within every blue state, there are red pockets, and I just don't know if we're going to go down. But it's a good question. And I can't guarantee that's the case. So we'll see. Yes.
estimated cost of this year's US Senate race in Ohio? What would you guess that both parties will spend? Based,
Goodness. It's gonna have to be over $150 million, probably closer to 200 million. When you get right down to it, yeah. It's got a $30 million injection into his campaigns in the last couple of weeks. So yeah, it's gonna be a several $100 million race, which is astronomical. Yeah. Yes.
Over the years, it would seem to me that polling should become more accurate with AI and computers and all this kind of stuff, but it seems to me the results are less accurate.
Yes, the difference is we're still in this transition between telephone polling, which was largely reliable because most people had a landline, most people would answer the phone, to the internet world, where most people will have internet connection and you can do polls digitally through web providers. We're in the sort of twilight between those two worlds. And that's, I think, why we're getting so much sort of nebulous outcomes. People still do telephone polling. A lot of them don't answer their phone. So those samples are not representative necessarily, because the kind of person that will answer a random phone number is not necessarily your average citizen. Right? I mean, don't feel bad if you're one of those people that say, so until we straddle that and figure out the transition, you're going to get some bumpy results. The gold standard for polling is face-to-face interviewing, but obviously that's expensive and time consuming. But if you want to do a bulletproof, scientifically rigorous poll, it needs to be face-to-face. It needs to take weeks or months to do. And that's what the best polls do. But those are multi-year surveys that are, cost millions of dollars. And so, so that's the one concern. The other concern is just polling now creates news. And because it creates news, there's an incentive to just throw polls out there to get clicks and to get feedback. So even if the poll's trash, you're just getting traction. You don't care. And so we're kind of inundated with a lot of bad polls because of that. So I agree with you. We should be doing better, but I'm not sure we will for a little bit. Maybe one more or two more.
I could go all day with questions. I'll give you some easy ones. Just who's your favorite pollster? I'll say mine. I don't necessarily like their kind of attitude, but Trafalgar has been really good. Who do you like?
I like the aggregate of all the polls. So I mean, I think they're good and worse polls. They're certainly for sure. But I usually look at the aggregate totals and try to figure out based on all that what we're looking at. Trafalgar's been pretty good with Republican races in particular. They've struggled in blue states, but they don't do a lot of polling in blue states because they're sort of making their name for doing well with the Trump Republican Party.
Right, too.
But they've been pretty accurate in those races. And so it's hard to argue with that. But no, I think you're generally better off trying to get a good sample of polls and mash those together, and that's for the best.
Another, this is probably the toughest one. I think I even brought it up last year. I've been very concerned. I see this. I had a discussion on my Facebook page last week where people say, "Oh, both sides, it's both sides thing," and I go, "No, it's not. It's not. The extremes are not balanced. It's not an even bell curve." All the data has shown over the last 50 years, whether you're looking at Pew Research, Harvard's Global Party Survey, the Liberalism Index, that the Dems have shifted slightly left, and the Republicans are marching right, far right towards like they're getting close to like the Hungarian far right party, moving towards Greek's New Dawn. That's very concerning for me. It's a deal breaker. I voted, by the way, a very split ticket in the 2020 election, like probably almost 50-50. But deal breaker for me this time around is: did you support the insurrection, and do you believe in the 2020 election was it legitimate? So if you supported the insurrection and believe the lie that the election wasn't legitimate, it's just a deal breaker right there. And because I worry about the future of democracy if people are continuously undermining it. And so like this race and like looking ahead, like where does this end, this whole undermining democracy thing? That's a heavy question.
Yeah, I've got just about 30 seconds. No, it's the right question in the sense that I think even if you take out even if we just sort of look at it as a both sides, let's just assume there's a both sides issue here. But again, I agree with the premise of your question. Let's assume it's a both sides issue. What concerns me probably the most is the lack of common ground between those positions to functionally deal with problems. And so to the extent that there's polarization, there's a shrinking amount of just territory that people can get into a room and talk and work out a solution to something that we need to work out a solution on. And it isn't the kind of the dirty secret of Washington is that it isn't them. Because honestly, they actually know each other and get along well with each other. They're mostly friends with each other. They don't hate each other. They act like they do for performative purposes. But it's we keep sending these messages of polarization that they're responding to, and those are the incentives, and that's where they're going. And so I think it's really a big cultural problem, to even to the extent that many of the places we belong to, whether it's a Rotary Club, or whether it's a Chamber of Commerce, whether it's a church or a school board, those places are becoming increasingly segregated politically. And so even in community outlets, they're not diverse politically, which means we have less and less experience talking with people from these different perspectives. And some of that's unavoidable because what's happening is moving patterns are getting segregated. Counties are getting segregated. States are getting segregated. And so I don't know what the outcome of that looks like. And that's the kind of thing that causes the political scientists to stay at their back. Because you can foresee outcomes that are just horrific. Unstable societies tend to do very awful, violent things. I hope that's not the path. So I don't have an answer. I agree with your concern. That's it. That's all the time I'm guessing.
Can I ask one real quick question? You get 2 minutes.
Yes.
So I understand that Herschel Walker's a terrible candidate and he played football at some point. Where did he go to college?
Well, I don't know if I said particularly he's a terrible candidate. I am reading something into my rhetoric, but it's a thing I wouldn't see. It is. Put on the phone. That's good. Good one. Thank you very much.
Nice job, Dave.
I went to one of those schools that will never win a national championship. And every year, I believe, we're a dark horse candidate for the Rose Bowl. We never will be. Okay, let's see. So we do have a book dedication. I'll have you sign this actually afterwards. Beth, as always. George Washington's name of the book. We'll be dedicating this to the Beavercreek Library. So thank you, Beth, for that. Next week's readers, Dave Dunce and Beth Handwerker. I would encourage as many people as possible to attend next week. If you see a Rotarian who's not here, to reach out to them, encourage them to come next week. We have 2 speakers. We have Hank Griffin, who is talking about his memories flying an F-15. But we also have the benefit of having Barry Rassin, who is the Rotary International past president from 2018 to 2019, attending our club meeting. The district as a whole has never had a Rotary International president come to the district. So we're quite fortunate to have him in attendance. This is why Dawn is fired next week. We're going to start with Barry. Barry's going to get about half the time, and then Hank is going to get half the time. So please come next week and reach out to a Rotarian you haven't seen in a while and let them know it'll be worth coming to. And a reminder that Flags for Heroes is coming up too. I'll remind you all next week. So with that, anything for the good of the club? Okay. Sir, would you lead us in the pledge of allegiance? Yes.
I pledge allegiance to God and the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Really good. I
don't know where the thing is today. Okay, well,